Ever thought about the staying power of popcorn in your emergency food supply? A little bowl of this can really boost morale during tough times. So come along and join me as we explore popcorn storage, preservation, and even rejuvenation techniques that every prepper, and indeed anyone that wants to optimize your pantry, should know. Welcome back to my channel. Hi, I'm Prepper Potpourri, and this is the place where preparedness meets practicality. And today, we're turning our attention to a treat that is often thought of as just a movie night treat. But it could be a valuable asset in your long-term storage. Popcorn is versatile and an addition to any prepper pantry. It's a nutritious snack, and a cup only has less than 100 calories. Well, as long as you don't slather it with butter and salt. I mean, did you know that popcorn packs more fiber per serving than even whole wheat bread? In addition to fiber, popcorn is also a good source of polyphenols, which are antioxidants that have been linked to better blood circulation and digestive health, lower risk of certain cancers. Who knew? This is actually good for you. So in this format, easy to store, and you can actually grind it and use it to make corn muffins, tamales, tortillas. But more about this later. Now, before we start discussing essential storage methods, we have to understand what makes a little kernel like this turn into a kernel like that. Did you know that a kernel expands 25 times its volume? Each kernel of popcorn has a small amount of water right in the center, and it's surrounded by starch. And then, of course, there's this hard armor on the outside, right? Native Americans used to think that there were spirits in this corn. And as they would heat them up over a fire, the spirits would grow angry and then burst out of their home in a puff of steam. But now I imagine that every kernel of popcorn is like a little mini Instant Pot pressure cooker. And as that kernel heats up, the water expands, building pressure, and eventually the outer layer gives away, causing the popcorn to explode, right? And the soft starch inside the popcorn really allows it to turn inside out. And then it's ready to eat. What we have to remember is the key for the poppability of popcorn is that little bit of water in each kernel. If that little bit of water isn't maintained, your popcorn won't pop. So you buy a bag of popcorn. And what does it say the best buy date is? Well, usually it's about from 2 years of production. And then it isn't that it goes bad necessarily, but the quality diminishes and the amount of kernels that pop diminish. So how can you extend the shelf life of this popcorn? Well, did you know that they found popcorn over 1,000 years old in tombs in Peru? And believe it or not, some of that popcorn still popped. Thus, we know popcorn can have a long shelf life, easily in excess of 10 or 15 years, if stored properly. So what affects that storage? Well, you need to avoid exposure to air, moisture, sunlight, and of course pests to preserve the quality of popcorn kernels. And remember, the magic in popcorn's pop lies in that moisture content. So it's a delicate balance. Too much moisture can cause the popcorn to develop mold. Not enough moisture can dry out the kernels, rendering them inactive. So proper moisture levels are essential for prolonged storage. And if you can, aim for a humidity level between 50 and 70%, and that will help prevent moisture-related issues. And as storing most things, you want to limit air exposure. Oxygen in the air can degrade popcorn's kernels, a little bit of fat in them over time, leading to an off taste, some say even rancid. So limiting that exposure to air can help preserve both flavor and health benefits. But when we talk about temperature, stability is important. Never ever put your popcorn kernels into your freezer. Not a good idea. Just try to keep it consistent. Between 50 and 70 degrees is optimum. And like I said, sunlight, artificial light can harm your popcorn kernels because it's called photooxidation. And again, that can affect the taste of your popcorn. And popcorn, just like other grains, can attract pests such as rodents and bugs. And that definitely can cause spoilage. But remember, as time increases, the quality and the poppability of your popcorn will decrease. So how do you know if something's still good to eat? How can you detect spoilage? Well, in your corn, one of the ways is odor. If it gives off kind of a rancid smell, well, that's not good. You want more of a neutral smell. And there are other signs to look out. Is there any mold and mildew? Different colored spots. It could be white, it could be black, it could be green on the kernels. If so, throw the whole thing away. That means the environment you kept it in was too damp, or it was too damp when you put it in your storage. And even if they don't have mold, if your kernels have a slightly wrinkled surface and are kind of soft to the touch, well, that means they've been exposed to moisture and they could be spoiled. And of course, if you see that pests have eaten into your storage, left droppings, that type of thing, throw it away. Navigating through the different recommendations for how to store your popcorn kernels can be a bit confusing. Should you use those little desiccant pouches? Should you vacuum seal? Are oxygen absorbers really needed? And what are the most effective containers to store your popcorn in? Well, here's what I do, and I hope it will help you. First, before you store it, put in any container, make sure the popcorn is dry. You do not want to store moisture with your popcorn. Now, your popcorn often comes in a bag like this, but I suggest taking it out of the bag. Now, for my everyday use and not my longer term storage, I store my popcorn in vessels like this. It's a bit airtight, pests can't get into it, and I can easily see how much I have left. But that is for my everyday storage. Now, if you want to store your popcorn longer, it's best to put it in an opaque type container, something that will block light. Now, in my case, you might want to reuse here. This was for holiday nut storage, and it has a really nice lid on it. It's going to keep it nice and tight. And then I can put it in a Rubbermaid container so it's out of light. But you also might like to store them in a Mylar bag, because definitely light can't penetrate that. I like the Wallaby brand Mylar bags. This is the little MRE pouches, which is nice because it stands up, so it makes it easier to fill. Both the mason jars, other jars that you're reusing, such as these, all are great choices in addition to your Mylar bags. Now you might say, well, what about desiccant packages? I say, don't use them. There's a possibility that they could overly dry out your kernels over time, and they won't have that little bit of water, so the kernels won't pop. So I do not use desiccant packages. So you say, okay, then do we vacuum seal? And I'm going to tell you, I love vacuum sealing a lot of things, but I do not vacuum seal the popcorn. That's quite a bit of power sucking the air out. You don't want it to, in addition, suck out internal moisture in the kernels. I just don't think it's needed. But you are welcome to use an oxygen absorber in your Mylar bag or in your jar. You can use an oxygen absorber if you want. We're just going to stick that in here like this, kind of get as much air out as we can. And then we're just going to seal it up. So this is great, but you might want to seal it also. And then we have a nice seal on top. That oxygen absorber may help with maintaining the taste and crunch of your popcorn. So you've sealed up your popcorn, but now you got to decide, where do you store it? Well, like I've said before, popcorn thrives in cool, dry conditions and where that temperature remains consistent. And ideally, we store them in temperatures between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 centigrade to 21 centigrade. And are there any worries if you consume old popcorn? Can it make you sick? Luckily, typically eating old popcorn won't give you any significant health issues. Unlike a lot of perishable foods, popcorn kernels don't attract common food pathogens. Now, what do you do if you open your popcorn stash, you heat it, and yeah, you get disappointing kernel poppability? Well, here's a couple of tricks you can try. You can soak your kernels in water for 10 to 15 minutes, let them dry well on a paper towel, and then try popping them. And if that doesn't work, you can take a mason jar and add your popcorn in a teaspoonful of water, shake it up well so the water is evenly dispersed among the kernels, and leave it for a day or two until you no longer see the water in your jar. And once that moisture is gone, it should be ready to pop. Now, when someone mentions popcorn, we usually think a bowl like this, but the popcorn kernels can be ground into cornmeal. And you can make a lot of different things, including one of my favorite, like my mom used to call it, Johnny cake, or some fantastic tamales or tortillas. But if you just grind your corn, there can be a problem. Now do realize the outer coating on these kernels is harder than normal corn. So you want to make sure that you have a good blade on your grinder. But you won't want to use this cornmeal prepared in this fashion too often, or you could develop a disease called pellagra. And symptoms of this disease include dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and even eventually death. In fact, in the first half of the 20th century, over 100,000 people died from this disease in the southern United States. You might say, well, I don't understand that. Indigenous people, Native Americans, ground their corn. But they also introduced a process which now we call nixtamalization. Because if you don't do this process, the cornmeal is deficient in niacin. And if that is the primary food source in your diet, you will end up with a niacin deficiency and pellagra. But, like I said, Native Americans had a way around that. They actually seeped water through wood ash and treated their corn before they actually ground and made their food dishes. And you can do this at home too. You can use just a pickling lime like Mrs. Wages here. And if you're interested, MexicanPlease.com has very easy instructions on how to make great corn tortillas from popcorn kernels. So my bottom line is, if you consistently rotate your stock every 2 years, you don't have to worry about preserving your popcorn in Mylar bags. But if you are looking to extend your storage, follow these storage recommendations and you'll be rewarded with poppable, crunchy popcorn, even if you're huddled in your bunker with your family during the apocalypse. And if you love spaghetti and want to know how to extend the life of your pasta, watch this.